kind of mass extinction for media companies that resulted from this fraud, because there just weren't any users. So this is kind of a good way of talking about how the equilibrium that arises out of Insidification is this very narrow and brittle one, where nearly all the surpluses get transferred to the corporate shareholders, but enough is left behind so that consumers and producers remain locked in. And that equilibrium, it's very brittle. It's a hard wave to surf. It's very easy to tip over. A small shock like a privacy scandal, a whistleblower complaint, a highly public platform abuse, whether that's like bullying or something really spectacular like a live streamed mass shooting, they can tip these platforms over into uselessness and leave the platform in a condition where people are just running for the doors. And this is how we end up with Facebook now kind of thrashing around, reinventing itself as Meta, and insisting that platform users are doomed to live out the rest of our days as highly surveilled, low-resolution, legless, sexless cartoon characters in a metaverse named after a concept from a literal dystopian science fiction novel, right? So I'm here to say that it's okay for platforms to collapse. The focus on intermediate regulation should be on protecting platform users from the Insidification cycle, not on making platforms better, not on prolonging their senescence as they sink under their own weight. And I'm going to propose two ways of achieving this, two kind of rules that we can embrace. And I'm at pains to point out, because depending on like which part of the elephant you've got hold of as the proverbial blind man, when I propose these, people go, oh, well, that's going to be a law, or it's going to be a policy, or it's going to be a standard, it's going to be a rule. It's kind of all of the above. The idea here is to have some conceptual ideas that we can then weigh platforms against. We can say when they break the law, here is your structural remedy that the prosecutor is going to offer you. We can say when there is a legislative energy to do something about the platforms, we incorporate this into the legislation. We can say that when engineering students graduate, we should ask them to pledge to uphold these principles. We can ask consumer rights groups or reviewers or the technical press to make league tables that compare platforms based on these criteria. So they're all of the above. And the first one of these criteria is something that those of you who are old net heads, you will remember: end-to-end. End-to-end is in this context is a rule requiring platforms to connect willing senders with willing receivers, which is to say that if I subscribe to your feed, when you update that feed, I should see the update. If I search for your goods and the platform has an exact match for the good, that should be at the top of the result. If I hoist an email out of the spam folder and mark it as not spam, then your emails just shouldn't be marked as spam thereafter. It was surreal last year to hear Congress debating whether Google's marking their unsolicited political fundraising emails as spam was censorship, when there is an actual form of politically salient censorship underway on Google and the other big email platforms, which is that if you specifically ask to hear from your elected representative, there is no way to tell the platform that you want those messages delivered. And indeed, those messages are routinely put in your spam folder, along with other messages from other political actors that you asked to hear from. This is not a new problem. In the early 2000s, Wendy, who I see on the call, will remember that at EFF, we intervened against AOL when they were marking double opt-in messages from Planned Parenthood as spam. This problem could have been solved a very long time ago, and we're still fighting it. So that's the end-to-end principle. Beyond end-to-end, I also want to talk about us enshrining a right to exit. And to explain how the right to exit works, I'm going to give you a little recent parable. You may have heard that there's a server called mastodon.lol, where a volunteer called Nathan hosted 12,000 users, and where an obnoxious fight over the new Harry Potter game broke out, and so demoralized Nathan that he told all of his users, I'm shutting down the server, get bent, hit the road, find someone else to host you for free. Now, maybe this sounds terrible to you, but you have to understand that Mastodon, indeed ActivityPub services in general, have a very easy mechanism to migrate to another server. You simply export the list of your followers and the people you follow with one click, and then with another click, you import them into another Mastodon server, and you're back up and running. Which means that Nathan's 12,000 recently digitally homeless users have it better than the 450 million Twitter users who can't leave that platform without losing all their followers and everyone they follow and shattering their social network. So a right of exit would be an adjunct potentially to existing data protection laws and principles. So we already have this broadly shared principle that if you are a platform operator, if you are rather a platform, or if you host user content or user data and that user demands it, you have to hand it over. We could expand that to say that it has to include these other forms of user data so that users can reestablish themselves on other platform. And we could require large platforms either as a matter of regulation or as a remedy for other violations. I mean, if we look at Twitter, Twitter has got this kind of endless future of regulatory remedies being imposed on it because of all the rule breaking it's already done. So this could be a remedy that we impose as a condition of its settlement. We could say that you have to run your platform in such a way that it allows users who have these files detailing who they follow and who they follow to go somewhere else and remain in contact with those users. And indeed, when Blaine Cook was building Facebook or Twitter's original API, it was basically modeled on the nascent activity pub. So that's not a big lift. And indeed, I want to stress that none of this is a big lift, that two of the criteria that we should be looking to when we think about remedies for bad platforms is administratability and compliance costs. So both end-to-end and right of exit are really easy remedies to administer, right? Unlike questions like, did you block harassment? Or are you in some other way a good platform maintainer, which are fact intensive, can take many years to resolve, require broad consensus on what constitutes harassment, whether certain conduct rose to the threshold of harassment, and whether a platform's failure to do something about it was the result of some foreseeable negligence or an unavoidable consequence of scale or whatever. Asking whether a message was delivered to followers is really easy to adjudicate, right? You just say, you send a message and you see whether it goes to the followers, right? When I search for a product on Amazon, if that product is on Amazon, do I find it? Super easy to administer. It also doesn't require a high compliance cost. Nathan, who runs his Mastodon server, all he needs to do to comply with end-to-end and to comply with right of exit is not change the Mastodon software. And for Twitter or Facebook or Google to do this, it requires that they do things like embrace open standards. It doesn't require that they do something extremely difficult. So rather than creating these parallel corporate civil justice systems to adjudicate content moderation calls or to decide to remove users, we just make it easier for end users and businesses to take their custom elsewhere. Rather than trying to allow people to know a priori which platforms are good and which platforms are bad, we make it so that the choice to use a platform is less consequential because you can leave. In other words, we're going to treat bad platform owners as damage and route around them. So some of the people who have encountered this thesis of mine have opined that Insidification is just a form of rent seeking or wage theft or fraud. And I want to say that Insidification is endemic to digital platforms, and it is different from these other phenomena. Although it shares a common root with other competition problems, the anti-competitive mergers and the predatory pricing that corral business users and end users and deprive them of alternatives are endemic to all of our corporations, right? This is, as we wrote in Choke Point Capitalism, the shape of the entertainment industry. 5 giant publishers, 4 giant studios, 3 giant labels, 2 giant ad tech platforms, 1 giant company that does all the ebooks and the audiobooks, 2 companies do all the beer, 3 companies do all the shipping, 2 companies do all the spirits, 1 company does all the running or all the cheerleading, 1 company does all the wrestling, 2 companies do all the running shoes, 1 company does all the eyeglasses. They all look like this. So in that regard, this is not distinct from other firms that are facing monopolistic pressures and that are engaged in monopolistic and predatory conditions. But there are 2 uniquely digital aspects to Insidification that only arise out of platforms in an internet-based world that are different from mergers and different from other predatory conduct. The first is that platforms are able to do something I call twiddling. So they're able to change the platform rules with a click of a mouse. So imagine 2 different aspects of Jeff Bezos. So on the one hand, you have Jeff Bezos, grocer, owner of Whole Foods. If Jeff Bezos wants to gouge us on the price of eggs and do some experiments to see what the market will bear, he needs an army of teenagers on roller skates with pricing guns who fan out across the store repricing eggs every time he changes his mind. Now imagine Jeff Bezos, grocer, owner of Amazon Fresh, which is Amazon's grocery delivery platform. When Jeff Bezos wants to twiddle the price of eggs there, he moves a slider around. And so, as with every shell game, velocity matters. The quickness of the hand is what deceives the eye. Every platform scandal that we have involves high-speed digital maneuvers that just aren't possible in the analog world. It's not that John D. Rockefeller and JP Morgan wouldn't have done this stuff if they could, but if you're a rail baron hoping to destroy a ferry business, you can't just like lay track by clicking a mouse overnight. But if you're Amazon and you want to put diapers.com out of business, you just move a slider so you're selling diapers below cost, and you lose $200 million a month for as long as it takes to put all these companies out of business. So I'm here to say that this twiddling shows us that the platforms aren't run by evil sorcerers who are hacking our dopamine loops. They're ordinary mediocrities who use the same repertoire tricks as their forebears, but they do it faster with computers. And this is why all that Kremlinology of platform users, where you have, YouTube performers who are like, I can't swear in the first 15 seconds. My thumbnail only has to have primary colors. TikTokers who are like, I spell lesbian $bean so that I'm not downranked by the homophobic content recommendation algorithm. Why it's all so frustrating, because even if they're right, and maybe they're doing a lot of controlled experiment, they're not right for long. As soon as you figure out how the platform works, someone twiddles a knob and it changes. Now, twiddling isn't all bad. Users can twiddle back. As Doc has told us, ad blocking is the largest boycott in world history. That's just twiddling, right? It's just changing the browser so that what the publisher shows you doesn't show up on the other side. Removing DRM, jailbreaking devices, installing an alternative app store, those are the users twiddling, right? And twiddling seizes the means of computation when users can do it. It claws back value from platform operators. That's true for business customers too. Publishers did a thing called header bidding, which allowed them to circumvent Facebook and Google's illegal collusive Jedi Blue program. So the issue here isn't merely that platforms twiddle in every hour that God sends, that they can't keep their fingers off their knobs. It's that they hoard all of the twiddling. They use anti-circumvention laws like Section 1201 of the DMCA, terms of service, tortious interference claims, cybersecurity laws, patents, and other rules to erect a kind of felony contempt of business model that lets them twiddle you, but criminalizes it when you twiddle back. So to get the internet back, we need to de-inshitify it. We need to give up on the council of despair that says we can never defeat the evil sorcerers, and all we can hope to do is install them as constitutional monarchs who take on board some advice from regulators. Rather, we need to engage with the material technical forces that drive Insidification and throw them into reverse. Which means, on the one hand, we do traditional antitrust, merger scrutiny, structural separation, and other traditional antitrust that right now the DOJ, the FTC, the Competition and Markets Authority in the UK, the European Commission, even the Chinese Cyberspace Authority are all doing at high speed in a way that we haven't seen in 2 generations. Great. But then we need constraints on platform twiddlings. We need to take their fingers off their knobs. We need to do things that stop them from changing the rules, like privacy laws, minimum wage laws for gig workers, and other fairness-based rules that keep their fingers off the sliders and allow us to know what the outer parameters of their twiddling is, what they can and can't twiddle. And then we need to reinvigorate user-side twiddling. We need to mandate interoperability. We need defenses in law for adversarial interoperability, reverse engineering, scraping, bots. We need, because right now, without this, we are living in a world where platforms are unconstrained by either regulation or competition, where they can add as many knobs as they want to the back end and twiddle them all day long, and where we are legally prohibited from twiddling back at them. And that is a world where we are guaranteed to get twiddled to death. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Are we off mute? Yeah, we're off mute. Okay, wait, I don't know if this scrolled up. I think Adrian had the first question there in chat.
Okay.
So
can we treat the right of exit as a specific case of the human right against forced association?
So again, like we're getting into some specifics here. Yeah, that's a way to talk about it, right? That is a way, like, if people are like, I don't get it, if you're at like the UN General Assembly or, Human Rights Watch board meeting, and you're trying to argue about whether this should be like a principle that should be taken on board in a treaty or as a piece of policy work or, in a grant proposal or whatever, you can say, yeah, this is like, the right of exit is a way of moving these traditional human rights foundations forced association, prohibitions on forced association into the digital realm. In early EFF land, we used to talk about the fact that your civil rights shouldn't disappear just because you're on the internet. That is a kind of principle to articulate. It's not a policy, right? Like to turn that principle into a policy, you then need to operationalize it. So yeah, why not, right? There's nothing incompatible with a prohibition on forced association and the right of exit. That's a good cognitive connection you've made there, and where it's appropriate, you should use it.
So Eric Rangel has one there. Are smart contracts needed to enforce these proposals?
I'm a crypto skeptic here, and so this is the place where we talk about our differences instead of our commonalities. I make no coiners look like shit coiners. So yeah, I'm like Bitcoin maxis. So here's what I think about smart contracts, and the critique has a technical and an economic component. So the economic component first, any proof of work or proof of stake blockchain, its underlying mechanism for civil resistance is that disinterested parties do something, right? Sacrifice something in order to keep the blockchain viable. And I see Bruce in this chat there. In order to keep the platform viable, in order to operationalize the civil resistance, the only reason to do that for untrusted parties is speculation, and I think speculation is intrinsically harmful. So I think that, in fact, the last time I saw Bruce, Primavera De Filippi and I began an argument about this, that we ended up like walking half of Boston arguing about, and she was finally like, oh, I see where you're coming from. Yeah, you're right. And by your own lights, you're right. If speculation is bad, then all of this stuff is bad. And I'm like, yeah, that's right. I don't want to enshrine speculation as like a core mechanic for our decision making. Now onto the technical critique, right? I don't have to explain the halting state problem to you. Like, we don't know how to write non-trivial software. We know how it works. In computer science land, like, we sometimes have to build systems that are irrevocable. Like my canonical examples would be like anti-lock braking on a car. Like if it goes wrong, you can't unwind. There's no control Z for when your anti-lock brakes fail. Also, coolant for nuclear power plants. Like by the time that software fails and like misfires and fails to open, it's too late to like do an undo. And so in those limited circumstances where we have to write code that we can never undo, we like, first of all, we make very sure that there's no way we can ever undo them, that there's no way to replace them with something undoable. And then secondly, we then go in and we like surround them with as much cotton batting as we can, right? Like we want to make these as isolated as possible. We want to limit the instances in which we use them. In smart contract land, you have this circumstance where you're writing software that for like entirely gratuitous reasons, and I'll get to that in a minute, you decide just doesn't have a control Z, or control Z rather. I just finished speaking to a class in Vancouver, so my Canadianness is coming out here. So we gratuitously decide that there's no way to control Z that software. And the reason that is gratuitous is because for a smart contract to do anything that's not financial, right, that isn't like just paying interest to someone else or whatever, someone in the real world has to take the output of the smart contract and do something with it, and or has to adjudicate a real world question. If you and I have a smart contract for you to deliver a pizza, someone has to figure out whether you delivered the pizza. If we trust that person to come in and be the oracle who says the pizza was delivered, why don't we just trust them to like run the blockchain, right? Why do we need a civil resistant blockchain if we have a trusted third party we trust with the output of that blockchain? We can just put them in charge of it and not burn down the rainforest or do this proof of stake stuff. And if we're going to give them an undo, right? If we're going to have an oracle that has the undo, then why do we even have the smart contract? Why don't we just have a contract? As a legal matter, the lawyers on the call will know that contracts are not, like, the fact that contracts have ambiguity is like a feature and not a bug. The fact that contracts need interpretation reflects the fact that very few issues in the real world are clean. And when you collapse the complexity and nuance and the spectrum of outcomes in a contractual arrangement into a binary true or false, you actually don't get a good contract for anything more complicated than was the pizza delivered or were my windows cleaned. And then finally, in order for people to have a good caveat emptor in this contracting arrangement, you need to have someone who is capable of both understanding and interpreting a prospectus, and someone who's both capable of understanding and interpreting a software program. And the Venn overlap of that isn't so much an overlap as it is a sphincter. And so if we're going to say like to like the wide world of normies, from now on, like the basis by which all of your social questions are adjudicated is contingent on a caveat emptor arrangement in which you are capable of both understanding a prospectus and a software program. You are just like building a grifter's paradise, which, you know, is triply true when you say, and also, by the way, when the outcome finishes running, there's no undo. Right. So that's I'm sorry, that is my skepticism. I hope we can still be friends. I know a lot of people who are good and honorable people like smart contracts. I wrote them into my second novel in 2003. It's not like I've been thinking about this for a long time. I just think that they're a solution in search of a problem.
So there's a question, a follow-up question from Adrian. Should proprietary or secret AI be illegal? And then on Clark, I can't read it.
On that, is
But-
there?
Yeah, to follow up on that, is there a way to mandate that AI companies be required to show their training data set?
I guess this depends on what problem you're trying to solve. So, you know, there's definitely like, if you want to root out bias in an algorithm, you need to not only see the training data, you need to also see the RNG that fed the training data to the system, because there's an enormous degree of priority dependence in how the stuff trains up. I'm speaking as someone who's just read the papers, so I don't claim to be an expert here, but the example from the paper I'm thinking of says that if you have a perfectly representative set of data about loan defaults, but you feed it to the training system such that all of the women that it sees in the beginning are women who've defaulted, even if they have no higher risk of default than men, that the system will nevertheless interpret that, because of this priority bias, as women being more likely to default than men. And so, you know, understanding whether an RNG is fair is really hard. So now you're getting to like some really, really hard stuff. Like, is the data set representative? That's a hard question. Is the RNG poisoned? That's an even harder one. And then you also have to do the training yourself, which means that you need to have your own cluster, because there's a whole bunch of mischief and backdoors you can insert where you've got the cluster. So if we're talking about like recommendation systems, decision support, all of that, and you're adjudicating fairness questions, it's pretty hard. I don't know that, and I think disclosure like doesn't actually rise to that level. So, you know, this raises the question, what is secret, right? Like, is it secret if you disclose the source code for the RNG, you disclose the all the training data, you disclose the training order? There's still elements of this that you kind of have to be present at. Like, we're getting into a procedure where, to be really sure of it, to have that trusting trust kind of Ken Thompson degree of certainty, you need to do something that looks a lot like, you know, changing the root server keys, you know, with the ritual where it's live streamed and there's the special laptop that someone has gone in and torn the Ethernet ports out with a set of pliers and whatever. But you need to do it for a procedure that is so much more complicated than this. And then in terms of there's a separate question about AI art, which I think is different. Judging from the context of the questions, I don't think that's what you're talking about. My short take on AI art is that, as it stands, there isn't and shouldn't be a right to decide who can study a work and make inferences from it. You know, walking around the art museum measuring all the noses and coming up with a statistical picture of a nose shouldn't be something that rights holders can enjoin. And that I am worried about AI, so-called AI art. I hate the fact that we have to call it AI. Oh my God, it's not artificial. It's not intelligence. It's not learning. It is a machine. So there's a complicated algorithm acronym for this that goes salami. So salami art, I forget what the acronym stands for. So in the context of salami art, I think the legitimate concern, and it's a real one, there are a few peripheral ones, but the central one is de-skilling and replacement of skilled workers, skilled artistic workers, by algorithms. And the thing to recognize is that if we were to create a sui generis right to control who can train a salami with your work, that the structure of the arts market, as I went through 5 giant publishers, 4 giant studios, and so on, the structure of the art market is such that everyone who wanted to reach an audience because of this choke point capitalism shape would have to contract with one of these firms. The firms will amend their standard contracting terms to require that that right be transferred to them. This is what happened with sampling when we created exclusive rights in sampling. We created this exclusive right, and then the big 3 labels that control 70% of all copyrights amended their contracts to say, if you want to license a sample, you have to be signed to one of the big 3 labels. We'll only deal with each other. And as a condition of being signed, you have to sign away your sampling rights. So all of the sampling rights ended up in the hands of the labels, who now extract rent from working artists using those rights. So if you want to make art, you have to pay the labels to take the samples. It also then stops artists' work from reaching the public. So famously, De La Soul's work was off streaming services for 15 years. It's coming back in a limited way. The frontman for De La Soul died last month before any of it was live. Basically, we put them in the scrap heap of history for nothing out of this. And I think that, you know, if we create a new machine learning right, a new salami right, you will see companies like Getty saying, as a condition of selling through Getty, you have to let us make salami with your work. And you know, that's already happening in the game sector. So remember, there is no right to stop someone from training a machine learning system with your voice. And yet all of the game studios, which employ a plurality of voice actors, now require that every recording session begin with a kind of covenant where you say, I, Cory Doctorow, hereby freely assign the right to train a machine learning system with this recording session in perpetuity to whatever game studio I'm recording for. And if you don't like it, you can go pound sand, because they're the only employer in town for you, right? And so literally the only company that is in any position to cut their wage bill and deprive workers of a creative wage with salami art, those companies are the companies that will be able to acquire all the salami rights, right? And so like you will end up preventing like kids from making hobbyist videos out of salami, which won't make you a penny because they were never going to pay you. Meanwhile, the people who are most motivated to put you out of work are the people who will immediately get all the salami rights that you're conjuring into existence by being worried about wage theft. So I don't know exactly what we do about this. There are other things that we can do about it. I think there are ways to do collective licensing and collective bargaining. We could just say that there is no right. I think a great poison pill is to say, as the Copyright Office seems to be saying, if you make a work out of salami, it is not entitled to copyright. Only works of human authorship are entitled to copyright. So we say to Disney, fire all your animators if you want. Just make stuff out of salami from now on, except that you won't get any copyright at all in it. Disney is going to just line up to pay those animators, right? So maybe that's the way we do it.
We have a question from Barbara. I see it on the thing there. Here she comes.
Hey, everyone, and sorry I'm not on video. Cory, I have 2 questions on the end-to-end stuff. So a policy question and then how would we actually do it question. So okay. I just taught a class on internet platforms, and I was struck by how the students, who are clearly very young, don't remember the time when we had this kind of end-to-end, what comes in goes out thing on social media. And so they are really susceptible to the argument that some people are making out there, that we do need the platforms to moderate this content for us, because if I follow 1,000 people on Twitter and I would just get everything.
Bracket, but proceed to put the worst TS.
Sorry, go on.
If I follow 1,000 people on Twitter, you know, I need the platforms to show me what I really want to see. And so I don't agree with that, but I would be curious of how you would respond to that. And then so still in the context of the policy stuff, would you still let the platform filter for, I don't know, objectionable content in this end-to-end option? Or would you say that's the user's choice if they want to, you know, put on a filter, that's what they can do? And then more practically, how would you imagine this to be implemented? Are you envisioning the kind of social media law that says, you know, you have to offer this kind of regulation where, you know, the default feed or one feed that people get is unprocessed, unmoderated, and who would be subject to it?
Right. Those are both excellent questions. So I think you're right that our imagination of how end-to-end and federated media can work has been severely crippled by the 40 years of increasing monopolization in the digital realm. I think, you know, for example, the Digital Markets Act in Europe, with its interoperability mandate, the reason that they made I think the blunder of starting with encrypted messaging, end-to-end encrypted messaging instead of social media, is that bureaucrats have no institutional memory of federated social media. If they're old enough to remember Usenet or FidoNet, they probably weren't using them. Whereas like interoperable messaging feels like a no-brainer to them, because, you know, if you're like a German who one day in Brussels takes out your phone with your German SIM and sends a text message to your Dutch colleague who's on holiday in Spain and it gets delivered, you're like, yeah, end-to-end messaging is really easy, which it is, provided you don't care about security. And if you do, it's really hard. And I'm really worried that, not that we can't do it, I think we can, but I'm really worried that the accelerated timeline that the EU Commission has put this project on is going to expose users to risk, and I'm worried for those users. After all, Jamal Khashoggi was lured to his death when the NSO group exploited a bug in WhatsApp to spy on him and engineer his execution on behalf of the Saudi royal family. And also, I am worried that will discredit interoperability more broadly. I think it's a real risk. As to how we revive the popular imagination about this, it's hard. I mean, I made a little piece. I'll see if I can pull the link up and paste it in the chat there. I made a little piece. It's like an interactive or a video here and some text and an essay and read aloud called Interoperable Facebook, that just kind of is like a design fiction user manual for an interoperable Facebook that doesn't exist. And the idea here is not that you can't have a feed, or even that platforms can't provide a feed. It's that the feed has to be better than just the people you care about saying the things that you care to hear, right? And you know, I think that it's a mistake, and that's what I tried to get at in my talk. It's a mistake to think of tech barons as more intrinsically evil or virtuous than the monopolists who came before them. You know, the reason that the record label started giving a better deal to musicians in the post-Napster era was that there were alternatives from the tech platforms. It wasn't that they found Jesus, right? They just faced some disciplining exogenous forces. The reason that they're getting worse now is that the tech platforms have consolidated and they're offering bad deals to the artists as well. And so, you know, it's like, it's not about their moral failings or their virtue. It's about the everyday mediocrity, right? The people in positions of enormous temptation, undisciplined by regulation or competition, end up caving in, and they do so often for very virtuous reasons, right? I mean, you know, I think we've all met startup founders who started off with a very high-minded vision and then pursued some form of insidification, not because they were like venal supervillains, but because it was like, the 150 people who I convinced to quit their jobs and come work for me, do I let them all miss their next rent payment, or do I sacrifice my principles in some way? You know, that's the thing that leads people one step at a time, incrementally into mischief and trouble. And so, you know, we do need to reawaken this popular imagination of how end-to-end could work. To be fair, we did it once before, right? Didn't exist, and then it did. We can make it exist again. It has manifest benefits. It has manifest benefits that specifically address the pathologies that people don't like about the internet today. And there are ways that we can push that along, which brings me to your second question, which is, what does this look like as a operationalized principle in the world? And that was what I was trying to get at before when I said this is a principle, not a policy, but it can be converted into policy. So I mentioned before that Twitter is on like a collision course with 11,000 enforcement actions by regulators all over the world. They've violated their consent decrees, they're violating European law, they're violating Canadian law, they're violating the CCPA, they're violating the GDPR, they're violating labor law, like you name it, they are thumbing their nose at it. And you can run across a river on the back of alligators for a long time without losing a leg, but eventually you're going to lose a leg, right? Stein's law says anything that can't go on forever will eventually stop. And so there is going to be opportunities for settlements. And settlements are really interesting because they don't have to go through a statutory instrument in order to settle. And one of the things that's super interesting in this era of corporate collusion is we've entered an era in regulatory collusion, where you see explicit collaboration between antitrust regulators and competition regulators around the world. One of the most heartwarming post-Brexit stories we could ask for is what's happening in the Competition and Markets Authority and its digital markets unit. So I think it was the coalition government that chartered the digital markets unit. It's the largest staff of engineers in any antitrust authority in the world. 70 full-time engineers on the payroll of His Majesty's Exchequer. And there was supposed to be secondary legislation to give them enforcement powers. And through no actual malice, I'm convinced about, the project of antitrust, just because Parliament has been in chaos for a decade now. They have never passed that that secondary regulation to give them enforcement powers. So for a decade, the digital markets unit has just been producing these incredible banger of technical market reports on ad tech, on the mobile network, on the mobile market. Go read them. They're 480 pages each, more gripping than the last. They're superbly done. They're just terrific. And they produce these and they can't do anything with them. They have no enforcement powers. But who's got a ton of enforcement powers and no engineers? The European Commission. And so it's not like Facebook's sins are different in Europe than they are in the UK. So these reports are like a treasure map that the European Commission can follow. And so here we are in this age of Brexit, where Britain and Europe are divorced, and there's never been a time of closer collaboration across authorities. So, there will be opportunities to say, hey, you just got their asses over there in Brussels or in the UK or in Seoul. And you're looking for a structural remedy over here in California, over there in DC, in Brussels, in Westminster. We got an idea, and we can make that idea into the condition of the settlement, and we can have some solidarity among antitrust regulators that makes that idea stick across multiple jurisdictions. So that's one way we could do it. We could also do it legislatively. Part of my theory of change here is the one that I borrowed from my arch enemy, Milton Friedman. I like to think that every time he hears me talking about this, he rotates a little faster in hell. And Milton Friedman, when he embarked on his project to reverse all the gains of the Great Society and to end the New Deal and to roll back the neo-feudalism of the Gilded Age, people were like, Milton, you're a crank. Who the hell is going to want to give up all of the progress we've made since the war years, what the French call les 30 glorieuses, the 30 glorious years that we've just experienced? And he said, there will eventually be a crisis. Societies are subject to exogenous shocks, pandemic, earthquake, fire, flood, war, alien invasion, meteors. And when that happens, ideas at the periphery can move to the center in an eye blink. You just need the ideas to be lying around. So we have seen so many instances in which we have gotten terrible regulatory or legislative responses to real and genuine technical problems with the platforms. I'm thinking of, say, the Digital Single Markets Article 17, which requires copyright filters, mandatory copyright filters. Everything that the GOP wants to do in this legislative session in respect of intermediaries, each of them worse than the last, many of them addressing real actual problems, but none of them going to solve it. If we have these well-developed technical proposals for legislative relief, when that crisis arises and when they're engaging in what we did after 9/11, what Bruce calls the security syllogism, something must be done, there I've done something. If we've got good ideas, the something that we do can be something good. And so maybe it'll be legislation. Maybe it will be something that we get investors like Union Square Ventures, who have shown themselves to be among VCs the ones most interested in a more pluralistic, decentralized internet. Maybe we get them to take a pledge. Our portfolio companies are going to be end-to-end companies, right? Maybe we make it an engineering pledge. So we get a school to say our engineers are going to pledge to build end-to-end. Maybe we just make it part of our critical language, right? Maybe Consumer Reports or EFF or Wired, when we write about a new platform, we can say this is a bad platform because it's not end-to-end, or it's a good platform because it is, right? So this is the kind of full stack technical proposal that I'm making here, right? Not that it just be like one of those things, but that if we have the idea lying around, there's going to be places we can shove it.
Okay, we have, yeah, we're at the top of the hour, so the recording is ending, but the meeting continues.
Okay.
Ryan, I think it was on there with his hand up for a long time, but he's now disappeared. So what's the name next time?
Daniel.
Daniel. So Daniel, go ahead.